It arrives on a Tuesday morning, not in your email, not as a notification, but a letter real parchment, sealed with wax, addressed to you specifically. Your name, your address, your exact room, delivered by an owl. You open it, and it says you have been accepted to a school of magic. What do you do? And more importantly, what would actually happen if you went? Let's start with the letter itself, because it is more historically interesting than you might think. Parchment letters sealed with wax were the standard form of official communication in Europe from roughly the 9th century all the way to the 18th century. Wax seals were not just decorative. They were security. Breaking a seal meant the letter had been opened, and the crest identified who sent it. So receiving a wax-sealed parchment letter today would feel extraordinary because it is a communication method that belongs to a different era entirely. And the owl. Owls have been associated with wisdom and magic since ancient Greece, specifically with Athena, goddess of wisdom. In medieval Europe, owls were considered omens, sometimes of wisdom, sometimes of dark magic, depending on the culture. The idea of owls as magical messengers is not invented by modern fiction. It stretches back thousands of years across dozens of cultures. So even the delivery method of your acceptance letter is rooted in real history. But here's the first real question. How did they know to send you a letter? Do you actually have magic? In virtually every magical tradition throughout history, magic was considered innate, something you were born with, not something you could acquire. Ancient Egyptians believed certain individuals were born with Heka, a divine magical force that was part of their very soul. Medieval European magicians believed they were drawing on forces that existed in nature, but only certain people had the sensitivity to perceive and direct those forces. The idea of born magical versus trained magical is one of the oldest debates in the history of occult practice. And across almost every tradition, the answer has been both. Some people have stronger natural ability, but training can develop what nature provides. Now, the school itself. Let's talk about what a real magical institution would look like, and what history tells us about how they actually operated. Real schools of esoteric knowledge have existed throughout history. They just weren't called schools of magic. The ancient Greek mystery schools, the Eleusinian Mysteries, the Pythagorean Brotherhood, taught secret knowledge to selected initiates. Entrance was by invitation only. The knowledge taught included mathematics, astronomy, music theory, and what they called the hidden nature of reality, which today we would call physics and philosophy. In medieval Europe, universities themselves were considered mysterious and slightly dangerous places. They taught natural philosophy, which included what we now call chemistry, physics, and astronomy. Oxford University was founded around 1096. The Aztec Empire wasn't established until 1325. The institution we consider ordinary today was once considered profoundly mysterious. So a school hidden from ordinary society, teaching extraordinary knowledge to selected students, that is not fantasy, that is history. The moving staircases, the hidden rooms, the portraits that talk, these are the fantastical elements. But the core idea of a secret school? Completely real. Your wand chooses you. That is the tradition. But where does the idea of a wand come from? Ritual staffs and wands appear in virtually every magical tradition on Earth. Egyptian priests carried the was scepter, Celtic druids used specific wood types, Norse shamans carried carved staffs. The specific type of wood was considered critically important. Druids believed different trees carried different energies. Oak for strength, yew for death and rebirth, elder for protection. This is not entirely disconnected from science. Different woods do have genuinely different physical and chemical properties. Yew contains taxine, one of the most toxic compounds in nature. So when a wand maker says the wood matters, they are echoing 3,000 years of accumulated human observation about the properties of natural materials. The wand core, dragon heartstring, phoenix feather, unicorn hair. These magical materials represent something real too. The ancient belief that the most powerful natural substances carried concentrated magical energy. Medieval alchemists genuinely believed certain animal parts contained concentrated life force. Bear hearts for courage, eagle feathers for vision, snake skins for transformation. The science was wrong, but the instinct was not entirely irrational. Now let's talk about what you would actually learn, because the curriculum of a magical school maps remarkably closely to real historical knowledge. Potions. In the magical world, a complex brew requiring precise ingredients, exact timing, and deep knowledge of how substances interact. That is chemistry, exactly chemistry, with different labels. The first European chemists were called alchemists, and they worked in exactly this way. Precise recipes, closely guarded secrets, combining natural substances to create transformative effects. Paracelsus, the 16th century Swiss alchemist, is considered the father of modern toxicology. He discovered that the difference between a poison and a medicine is the dose. That discovery, Still, one of the foundational principles of modern medicine came directly from alchemical practice. The magic class and the science class were the same class. Astronomy. In the magical world, studying the stars and their influence on events on Earth. Astronomy is the oldest science in human history. Every ancient civilization, Babylonian, Egyptian, Mayan, Chinese, tracked the stars with extraordinary precision. The Babylonians could predict eclipses centuries in advance using only observation and mathematics. No modern technology, just time, patience, and extraordinary attention to the sky. Herbology. In the magical world, studying magical plants and their properties in history, this was simply medicine. For most of human history, plants were medicine. The knowledge of which plant cured which ailment was one of the most valuable forms of knowledge that existed. Willow bark, used in folk medicine for thousands of years to reduce fever and pain, is the direct origin of aspirin. The magic worked. It just took centuries to understand why. Defense against the dark arts. In the magical world, learning to protect yourself from malevolent forces. In real history, this was exorcism, protective ritual, and the management of what people called dark spiritual forces. Every culture in history has had a version of this practice. And divination, reading the future in tea leaves, crystal balls, the stars. Divination is the oldest recorded spiritual practice in human history. Babylonian liver divination, reading the liver of a sacrificed animal, dates back to 2000 BCE. Did it work? Almost certainly not in the way they believed, but it served a real function. It gave decision makers a structured way to assess risk and commit to action. Now, the spells. Why is magical language always Latin, or at least Latin sounding? Latin was the language of knowledge, power, and the church in medieval Europe. For over 1,000 years, if you wanted to be taken seriously as educated, you spoke Latin. Real historical magical texts, grimoires, were written in Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and Arabic. The language was considered part of the magic itself. The idea was that certain words, in certain languages, carried power because they were closer to the original language of creation, what scholars called the Adamic language, or the language God used to name things. This belief, that language has inherent power, appears in almost every magical tradition. Hebrew Kabbalah, Sanskrit mantra, Arabic Quranic recitation, Egyptian hieroglyphic magic. Modern linguistics actually confirms part of this intuition. The sound and rhythm of language genuinely affects brain states. Chanting, mantras, and repetitive verbal formulas produce measurable changes in brain activity. But let's talk about the dark side of magical education, because history is not all wise professors and enchanted ceilings. The witch trials of Europe, from 1450 to 1750, resulted in the execution of between 40,000 and 60,000 people, mostly women, accused of practicing magic. The cruel irony, many of those accused were herbalists, midwives, and healers, the people most likely to actually have knowledge that worked. The history of magical knowledge is also the history of who gets to hold power and who gets persecuted for holding knowledge that others fear. In a real school of magic, the forbidden knowledge would not just be dramatically dangerous spells. It would be the knowledge that power structures throughout history have tried hardest to suppress. So, back to the original question. You have the letter, you have the place at the school. What would you actually experience if you went the Great Hall first? Imagine a room that seats 1,000 people, lit by thousands of floating candles, with a ceiling that reflects the sky above. Medieval Great Halls actually looked somewhat like this. Westminster Hall in London, built in 1097, had a roof span of 21 meters and was lit by hundreds of candles for royal banquets. The sorting, being assigned to a house based on your personality, this is not as fantastical as it sounds. Greek mystery schools assigned initiates to different levels and paths based on their aptitude and character. Medieval guilds had elaborate apprenticeship tiers. The instinct to sort and classify people by disposition is deeply human. Your first year, learning to focus your intention, direct your energy, understand the properties of natural materials, and observe the sky. By your third year, you are learning the history of magical practice and realizing that every spell you have learned has a direct historical ancestor. By your 7th year, you are not just a student of magic. You are a student of every system of knowledge humanity has ever developed. Chemistry, astronomy, biology, linguistics, psychology, history. Here is the question that stays with you. Why does the idea of a school of magic feel so compelling, even to people who know it is fiction? Part of the answer is that most of us spend our lives being told what is possible and what is not. A school of magic represents a world where the rules are different, where your potential is unknown, where the ceiling has not been set yet. The history of human progress is the history of people who refused to accept what was considered impossible. Every scientist who challenged accepted knowledge was, in some sense, practicing magic, claiming that the world contained more than what conventional wisdom acknowledged. Galileo was placed under house arrest for saying the earth moved around the Sunday. Semmelweis was committed to an asylum for suggesting doctors should wash their hands. Their colleagues thought they were practicing a kind of madness. Magic, throughout history, has often been the name given to knowledge that the mainstream wasn't ready to accept yet, which means the letter you are waiting for might not arrive by owl. It might arrive as a question you cannot stop thinking about, a problem that will not leave you alone, a subject that makes the ordinary world feel suddenly insufficient. That feeling, the one that says there is more to understand, more to discover, more possible than what you have been told, that is the real acceptance letter. The school of magic has always been open. You just have to want to go. Let me know in the comments. If you got the letter today, which subject would you want to study most? And which house do you think you would be sorted into? If you enjoyed this, hit like and subscribe. Bob Wonders has a lot more questions to ask.